All right, the squat is one of the most fundamental lifts that we perform, right? It's one of the big four. You've got the squat, you've got the press, you've got the deadlift, you've got the bench press. So it's hugely important to our strength training, but the squat is also very often misunderstood. When we think of the squat, most people kind of have a certain picture of that lift, of that movement in their head, very often influenced by various fitness media sources. But what if that same picture, that same kind of version of the movement in your head is what's holding you back? At best, it might be holding you back from training the lift as effectively, as efficiently as you could, and at worst, it might be holding you back from squatting at all. So if your squat feels inefficient, or it feels awkward, or worse, if you're struggling with balance, if you're struggling with depth, if you're struggling with knee pain, for instance, you are not alone. And here's how, perhaps a bit counterintuitively, we're gonna help you fix it. Before we get to the counterintuitive part, let's talk about a couple basic setup aspects, all right? So let's talk about bar position. If possible, and for most of you this will be possible, we'd like to get the bar sitting below the traps and sitting on the delts. In other words, in what we typically call the low bar position, or what we here at Testify just refer to as the position. So we'd like the bar sitting in that position. Once you've unracked the bar, you're gonna take a stance with your heels roughly shoulder width apart and your toes pointed out about 30 to 35 degrees. And for your focal point, you're gonna pick a spot in front of you on the floor, roughly 4 to 6 feet. Next up, again, not the counterintuitive part yet, let's talk about breathing and bracing. In other words, let's talk about how to make your entire midsection, your entire torso as rigid as possible. Rule number one, no breathing if you're moving. In other words, at the top of the squat, you're gonna take a breath in, you're gonna hold that breath with tightly clenched abs, really every single muscle in your midsection, but you can just cue yourself to clench your abs as if you're gonna take a punch, and you're gonna hold that breath, you're gonna hold your abs real tight all the way down and all the way back up, and then you're gonna release that breath. Now you're holding your breath in the back of your throat, okay? You're not trying to hold your breath against like puffed out cheeks or against your lips or anything like that. You should be able to do this either with your mouth open or closed. Most people will typically do it with their mouth closed, and that's totally fine, but if you're not sure whether you're doing it correctly, whether you're holding your breath in the right spot in your throat actually, just say the word hic and hold the CK sound. If you go hic and hold that CK sound, you're holding it in the back of your throat. If you can't do that, then what you were doing was you were holding your breath against your lips, which is not what you're trying to do, which is not what you should be trying to do. The second part of this is a little bit more subtle, but at all times we would like a straight back. In other words, what we're trying to avoid, of course we're trying to avoid a flexed back. Most people kind of have that counterintuitively or kind of intuitively in their head anyway. They kind of know they're not gunning for a rounded back, but you also definitely don't want an overextended back. In other words, you don't want to arch your back either. All right, so now here is the counterintuitive part. Here's the part that's gonna make squatting easier, it's gonna make it more effective, it's gonna make it more efficient. And specifically, we're talking about two things, but they're tied together, and that is back angle and hip drive, right? So when you start the squat, there's two parts to this, the descent first, obviously, and then the ascent. So as you descend, you're gonna shove your knees apart. Remember your stance, where your toes are pointing, those are arrows for your knees. So yes, your knees are gonna go forward because that's what knees typically do when they bend, but specifically, you're gonna shove your knees apart so that they're going in line with your toes. So it's knees apart, but here's the big part. It's going to be hips back, chest down. In other words, reach back with your hips and then get leaned over. You are purposely leaning over on the descent. Don't worry about being leaned over. You're not going to fall over, of course, because you're reaching back with your hips. And don't worry about the fact that your back is not going to be vertical. Remember, we don't need a vertical back. We would like a straight back. Your back will be much more horizontal in a deadlift than it will be in the squat. And most people lift often significantly more on their deadlift than they do on their squat anyway. So we want a straight back. It's just not going to be vertical all the time. As you descend, you're purposely going to get leaned over. It helps you solve the geometry problem that is the human body, right? You're getting your knees out of the way, you're getting your hips out of the way, you're getting leaned over so that you can achieve depth in the squat. So that's part of the descent, is the getting leaned over. And then once you've reached depth, once you've got your hip crease below the top of your knee, now for the ascent, here's the second part of the counterintuitive part. Not only are you going to get leaned over on the way down, you're going to stay leaned over for a while on the ascent, okay? So of course you're going to finish in a vertical position with a vertical torso, but if you try to get your back angle vertical right away, you try to lift your chest coming up out of the hole right away, it's going to make for a harder, weaker, less efficient squat. So stay leaned over a little bit longer than you think on the way up. Cue yourself to drive your hips up, or you can cue yourself to stay leaned over. So on your descent, reach back with your hips, get leaned over. On the ascent, stay leaned over a little bit longer than you think. As always, we hope this helps you get stronger and live better.